As dawn broke over the Polish countryside in 1940, an ominous shadow began to cast itself over the land, a structure unlike any the world had seen before. Auschwitz, built under the ruthless command of the Third Reich, would become a symbol of humanity's darkest hour. Conceived by Heinrich Himmler and Rudolf H.S., Auschwitz began as a concentration camp but soon morphed into the epicenter of Nazi atrocities. The camp's strategic location near Auschwitz in Poland allowed it to serve as a central hub for the mass transportation of prisoners. The first transport, consisting of 728 Polish political prisoners, arrived in June 1940. However, this was just the beginning. As construction of the camp progressed, the Nazis' intentions became ever clearer. Auschwitz would become a place where lives were stripped of dignity, where humans were reduced to mere numbers and labor units. Rudolf H.S., the camp's first commandant, was charged with turning Auschwitz into a place that would epitomize the Nazi regime. His methods were grimly efficient, involving strict labor regimens designed to break the prisoner's spirit. The gates of Auschwitz carried a cynical motto, Arbeit macht frei, a cruel lie that would ensnare thousands in its deadly trap. By 1941, the winds of change were blowing through the camp. As Auschwitz began its metamorphosis from a detention center for political dissidents to the heart of the Nazis' genocidal operations. With the arrival of Jews from across Europe in 1942, Auschwitz was transformed into the central hub of the Holocaust, marking the beginning of the systematic mass murder of innocent lives. Auschwitz II, known as Birkenau, was the facility's most notorious section. Designed by SS architect Karl Bischoff, Birkenau was equipped with gas chambers and crematoria that could annihilate thousands of people every day. The camp's grim expansion epitomized the industrialization of death, turning human life into a commodity to be processed and destroyed. The medical selection process, often overseen by Dr. Joseph Mengele, marked the true horror of Auschwitz. Mengele's notorious selections decided who would work and who would be sent to the gas chambers. His experiments on twins and his cruelty towards the prisoners are etched into the collective memory of the Holocaust. Every day in Auschwitz was marked by a brutal routine, one that destroyed the prisoners' will and hope. The daily roll call, which forced prisoners to stand for hours in the freezing cold or under the burning sun, was a constant reminder of their subjugation. Amidst this grueling regimen, the courage and solidarity of the prisoners shone through. Joseph Paczynski, a personal barber for Auschwitz's commandant Rudolf A.S., witnessed acts of resistance and camaraderie during these difficult times. Despite the cruelty and fatigue, some prisoners managed to comfort each other, sharing strength and providing moral support. Yet these moments of defiance were fleeting as the ever-present threat of death loomed over them. Inmates faced perilous work details. From constructing buildings to working in nearby factories, the conditions were appalling, and many perished from exhaustion or accidents. However, the harsh conditions often gave way to rare moments of human connection, as inmates shared songs, stories, and even celebrated holidays in secret. As the winds of 1941 blew over the haunting landscape of Auschwitz, an ominous shift was underway, signaling the darkest chapter of the camp's existence. Originally conceived as a prison for Polish political dissidents, Auschwitz's transformation into the epicenter of Nazi annihilation had begun. The architects of this transformation were none other than Heinrich Himmler and the notorious Est. This shift was underscored by the creation of Auschwitz II Birkenau, a companion camp to the original Auschwitz, whose sole purpose was to facilitate the mass extermination of the Jewish people and other targeted groups. Located a few kilometers from the original camp, Birkenau was designed for one purpose alone: to efficiently kill as many people as possible. Under the supervision of Karl Bischoff, a senior SS architect, Birkenau was conceived with chilling precision. The camp was a series of interconnected gas chambers and crematoria, designed not only for mass murder, but for mass production. Birkenau's infrastructure was purpose-built for genocide, with 4 gas chambers capable of executing thousands of people each day. This horrific industrialization of death was a true testament to the Nazi regime's commitment to their twisted vision of racial purity. The first mass transportation of Jews to Auschwitz began in 1942, marking a critical turning point in the camp's function. Previously a place of political detention, Auschwitz now became the final destination for tens of thousands of Jews from across Europe, primarily from countries like Germany, Hungary, and Poland. The first transport brought 1,000 Jews, but by the end of 1942, the numbers grew exponentially. Auschwitz's population swelled to over 30,000 by the end of that year, with many arriving in cattle cars, exhausted, malnourished, and often unaware of the fate that awaited them. Among the early prisoners who witnessed the transformation of Auschwitz into a death machine was Witold Pilecki, a Polish resistance fighter who voluntarily entered Auschwitz to gather intelligence. Pilecki's reports were the first to alert the Allies about the horrors unfolding within the camp's electrified fences, his bravery and determination highlighted the extraordinary acts of resistance that emerged from the very heart of darkness. His covert operation inside Auschwitz revealed the depths of the Nazi atrocities and would later serve as a crucial historical record of the events that transpired behind the barbed wire. While Pilecki's intelligence work shone a light on the hidden horrors of the camp, life inside Auschwitz for the average prisoner had become an unimaginable nightmare. Those who arrived were subjected to an immediate selection, where Nazi physicians like Joseph Mengele decided who would live and who would die. Mengele, infamously known as the Angel of Death, took particular interest in twins, conducting gruesome medical experiments on them in an attempt to prove his twisted theories about genetics. The prisoners selected for experimentation were often subjected to unspeakable horrors, and many did not survive. In the early days of Auschwitz, some prisoners clung to the remnants of normalcy. Secretly, small groups celebrated Jewish holidays, and cultural resistance, though dangerous, continued. A group of women in Auschwitz managed to orchestrate a secret Hanukkah celebration in 1942, hiding in the barracks, whispering prayers, and sharing their meager rations. These small acts of defiance illuminated the resilience of the human spirit even amid such overwhelming darkness. However, as the camp continued to evolve into a hub of industrialized death, so did the cruelty of the SS. Prisoners were increasingly treated as expendable labor. Many were assigned to the Buna synthetic rubber plant, where they worked under appalling conditions for IG Farben, a Nazi conglomerate. The workers were subjected to deadly exposure to toxic chemicals, and many succumbed to exhaustion, disease, and malnutrition. Prisoners at Auschwitz were forced to work in grueling conditions for hours on end, and those who faltered were often subjected to brutal beatings or worse death. Yet, amid the escalating brutality, there were small glimpses of resistance. Prisoners who had once been ordinary men and women transformed into determined survivors, finding ways to communicate, barter, and share information. Some risked their lives to comfort others, offering words of encouragement to those who had lost all hope. Their stories of camaraderie and solidarity became one of the few sources of light in an otherwise bleak existence. The resilience of the human spirit, in its most desperate form, found expression in the silent acts of defiance that punctuated everyday life in Auschwitz. Auschwitz's grim metamorphosis from a concentration camp to a symbol of industrialized genocide marked a dark chapter in human history. The horrors that unfolded within its walls were unimaginable, but the stories of resistance, resilience, and survival from its prisoners continue to remind us of the strength of the human spirit in the face of the worst atrocities ever committed. The people of Auschwitz, despite the Nazi regime's systematic attempts to strip away their dignity, found ways to hold on to their humanity and resist, even in the darkest of times. In the shadow of Auschwitz, where death and despair reigned supreme, another sinister dimension to the Nazis' operations came into play. The dark economy of forced labor. Auschwitz was not only a site for the systematic extermination of millions, but also a hub of industrial exploitation, where the Nazis capitalized on the labor of their prisoners to fuel the war machine. Forced labor became an insidious and integral part of the Nazi plan, designed not only to decimate the lives of the prisoners but also to benefit German corporations. From its very inception, Auschwitz was constructed with an industrial model in mind. The Nazis knew that they could extract economic value from those they sought to annihilate. The SS collaborated with major German corporations to exploit Auschwitz's prisoner workforce, establishing lucrative industries that relied on the labor of the incarcerated. The most prominent of these was IG Farben, a massive chemical conglomerate that constructed a synthetic rubber and fuel plant known as Buna. Work near Auschwitz III Monowitz. The conditions within Monowitz were horrific. Tens of thousands of prisoners were subjected to forced labor, working long hours in toxic environments. Many were exposed to deadly chemicals, and countless others perished from malnutrition, exhaustion, and the brutal treatment of the guards. Despite the horrific conditions, the work remained a cruel necessity for survival. Those who were deemed fit to work had a slightly better chance of surviving, while those considered weak or unfit for labor were sent to the gas chambers. Prisoners worked tirelessly to build roads, railways, and infrastructure for the Nazis, contributing to the war effort in ways they could never have imagined. They were forced to repair vehicles, assemble munitions, and even assist in the construction of new concentration camps. The Nazi regime's sinister calculation was that while the prisoners' lives were expendable, their labor could be exploited for the benefit of the war effort. Auschwitz's dark economy also extended to the textile and armaments industries, where forced laborers produced uniforms, weapons, and ammunition for the German army. Beyond the physical exploitation, the prisoners were also subjected to psychological manipulation. The Nazis ensured that food rations, working conditions, and even the prospects of survival were tied to the ability to contribute to the labor force. The prisoners' very existence was reduced to being nothing more than a means of production. They were treated as cogs in the Nazi machinery, their value determined solely by their utility to the regime. The human cost of these industries was incalculable, as millions of lives were lost to exhaustion, starvation, and brutal treatment. The dark economy of forced labor in Auschwitz became a reminder of how the dehumanization of a people can be used as a tool of profit. While the Nazis' quest for racial purity aimed at exterminating the Jews, Roma, disabled, and other targeted groups, they simultaneously found ways to exploit them for labor that directly contributed to their war effort. Yet, even in this industrialized hell, the human spirit flickered. Prisoners found small ways to resist, from the creation of underground barter systems for food to maintaining a fragile sense of community and solidarity, which sustained them against the crushing weight of forced labor. Auschwitz's role in the Nazi economy and war effort stands as a grim reminder of the exploitation that accompanies systems of totalitarianism and mass violence. It exemplifies the horrific intersection of industry and genocide, where human suffering was harnessed for economic gain. The forced labor that took place within the confines of Auschwitz served not only to sustain the Nazi regime but also to further the dehumanization of the millions who passed through its gates, forever cementing the camp's legacy as a symbol of industrialized cruelty. Starvation was one of the most potent and deliberate weapons the Nazis wielded within the confines of Auschwitz. As part of their genocidal policy, the Nazis used hunger as a tool to break the spirit of their prisoners and to speed up their physical deterioration. The dire conditions inside the camp, coupled with meager rations, played a significant role in the overall process of annihilation. For those imprisoned in Auschwitz, hunger was more than a mere inconvenience. It was an ever-present torment that gnawed at their bodies, minds, and souls. The daily reality of starvation in Auschwitz was a slow, insidious process that began with the meager rations provided to the prisoners. At best, the daily meals consisted of a thin soup, a piece of stale bread, and sometimes a small portion of rotten vegetables or a lump of cheese. These portions were far below the necessary caloric intake required to sustain a human being, and they were never enough to fuel the backbreaking labor the prisoners were forced to perform. The goal was simple: to weaken the prisoners, strip them of their dignity, and ultimately hasten their deaths. Prisoners often found themselves scavenging for any scrap of food they could find, trading whatever few possessions they had for a handful of flour or a piece of fruit. Bartering became a necessary survival skill in the camp, as food or the promise of food became the currency by which prisoners could sustain themselves for just a little longer. Even the slightest amount of sustenance could make a difference, and the underground economy that emerged within the camp was built around this desperate pursuit of nourishment. Yet hunger wasn't merely a physical affliction in Auschwitz. It was also a psychological weapon that the Nazis used to break the spirits of their victims. The daily struggle for food created an atmosphere of constant fear and uncertainty. Prisoners would find themselves obsessing over their next meal, always hoping for a larger portion or a chance to secure something more substantial. This hunger became a metaphor for the larger struggle for survival, as every morsel of food represented not just sustenance but a fleeting victory over the terror that surrounded them. Despite the horrors of starvation, the human will to survive persisted within the camp. Prisoners developed ingenious survival strategies, relying on solidarity, creativity, and even humor to keep their spirits alive. Some prisoners formed informal networks to share food, while others would write secret messages to their families or perform clandestine acts of resistance. The psychological endurance of the prisoners became as important as their physical survival. They clung to the hope that one day the nightmare would end, and they would be free. One of the most powerful symbols of survival in Auschwitz was the ability to maintain one's sense of identity and dignity, even in the face of starvation. The prisoners found ways to hold on to their humanity. The artist Charlotte Delbo, a French resistance fighter, created poignant drawings that encapsulated the life in the camp. Her works became a testament to the power of the human spirit to endure, even in the most hopeless of circumstances. Starvation, however, was only one part of the battle. Disease, malnutrition, and the grueling labor forced upon the prisoners all contributed to the brutal conditions. The squalid living arrangements, where prisoners were crammed into barracks like cattle, exacerbated the spread of disease. Typhus, dysentery, and other infectious diseases were rampant, claiming the lives of countless individuals. Yet despite the overwhelming odds, many prisoners managed to survive by relying on their comrades and finding small ways to resist the system that sought to break them. Auschwitz's story is one of unimaginable suffering but also of incredible resilience. Even in the face of starvation, sickness, and death, the prisoners held on to their hope for survival. The grim realities of Auschwitz serve as a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of remembering the past so that such horrors are never repeated. One of the most devastating aspects of Auschwitz was the systematic use of starvation as a method of control. The meager rations provided to prisoners barely allowed them to survive, let alone perform the grueling labor required of them. This deprivation served the dual purpose of weakening the prisoners and accelerating their deaths. Prisoners developed ingenious ways to survive. Relying on barter systems and small acts of rebellion, some found solace in their camaraderie, and shared moments of joy amidst the horrors. Yet, the constant hunger and deprivation took a severe toll on their physical and psychological well-being. Survivor testimonies, such as those from Primo Levi, highlight the torment of living in constant hunger, with bread becoming a symbol of life itself. Punishment in Auschwitz was swift and often lethal. The Nazis had a vast array of methods to maintain control and enforce discipline. Public executions, often carried out by hanging, were common and served as brutal reminders of the consequences of disobedience. Psychological punishment was equally pervasive, with the threat of death hanging over prisoners at all times. The infamous Block 11, also known as the Death Block, housed many of the camp's most notorious punishments, including starvation cells where prisoners were left to die of hunger. The constant fear of death, combined with the physical abuse, created a sense of despair among the prisoners, but also a silent resistance in the form of defiance and solidarity.